keen to rekindle his friendship with Werner Heisenberg. In October 1945, Niels Bohr was back in Copenhagen and wrote to Heisenberg for the first time in 6 years.
I hope that it shall not be long before we can take up our old collaboration. I trust that we shall all see happier days, and that the horrors brought over innocent people by men blinded by prejudice will be a lesson to all mankind.
Heisenberg welcomed the letter, but he felt that their closeness could only be restored if he and Bohr cleared up their misunderstanding over the wartime meeting. Heisenberg repeated his explanation of why he went to Copenhagen in an interview 20 years later.
I felt that it was good to ask Bohr's advice. Now, of course, I knew that Bohr was a Dane and Denmark was occupied by German troops, so it was obvious that Bohr would have very strong feelings in this matter. At the same time, I felt that Bohr and I were good friends, and he knew my attitude to problems of this kind from earlier years, so I felt that still this would be a good basis for confidence and for conversation on this problem.
But Bohr had no wish to discuss the past and insisted that the subject of the meeting was out of bounds. But Heisenberg wouldn't let it drop.
Heisenberg insisted with Bohr whenever he was together to say, can we talk about that? And Bohr said, now let's stop it. I mean, we have talked so much about it. Let's leave it. You know, I have finished the subject for myself. And Heisenberg said, this is not sufficient for me. He said, look, I'm not looking for absolution. That's not my point. But it hurts me that you, with whom I have worked so closely and I admire and whom I have learned so much, that you don't trust my intention, because that hurts me.
As long as Bohr refused to discuss their meeting, Heisenberg knew he would see it as a hostile visit. But Heisenberg wanted Bohr to accept he had in fact come in peace. Heisenberg was about to make his point to the whole world. In 1956, a book was published which suggested Heisenberg had in fact led a plot to deny Hitler the bomb. The book claimed Heisenberg's mission in meeting Bohr was to do a deal with him. He would stop the Germans getting the bomb if Bohr would use his international contacts to stop physicists elsewhere developing the bomb for any other country. Heisenberg was no longer portrayed as a villain, but as a hero. In a letter to the author printed in later editions of the book, Heisenberg appeared to endorse this radical new version of what had happened.
This situation at this time gave physicists decisive influence over further developments, since they could argue with the government that atomic bombs would probably not be available during the course of the war.
It was a dramatically different version of events. The same Heisenberg who had been ostracized was now being repainted as a hero who had stopped Hitler's bomb project. Bohr, it appeared, was recast too, as the friend who failed to join the physicists' action to stop both sides developing the bomb. Even now, Bohr maintained his silence on the subject, a silence that allowed the new book's version of events to gain credibility with a wide audience. It was a silence that would be maintained until long after his death. Heisenberg met Bohr for the last time at a conference for Nobel laureates in the early summer of 1962. Bohr's health was failing, but it seemed for the first time he was ready to break his silence on the subject of their Copenhagen meeting.
When Heisenberg met Bohr and asked him again, couldn't we not have another talk about it? And Bohr said, look, let's not do it. And he repeated again how important it is. And then Bohr apparently said, look, I mean, it's too late now. Let's meet tomorrow morning when we are fresh, and then let's do that.
But that night, Niels Bohr was taken ill and had to return to Copenhagen. The conversation Heisenberg had been desperate to have had never taken place. Niels Bohr died in November 1962. Heisenberg outlived Bohr by 14 years. He was left to wonder for the rest of his life what his old friend had felt about their Copenhagen meeting. It was a cruel silence.
Heisenberg died in a very biblical way. I mean, he had a cancer which couldn't be healed. And so he died at home. He was at home, and just a couple of days before he died, he asked some of his closest friends to his deathbed, you know, and he said, look, I'm very sad that I did not have this last talk with Niels Bohr. Yeah? So I knew when he said that on his deathbed that this cast a very dark shadow on his life, and I felt that whenever this comes up, it was a friendship which was very important for him, you know, which was destroyed by this.
Heisenberg died in 1976. He'd never stopped wanting the reconciliation that didn't come. Bohr's silence was the biggest disappointment of his life. But even after both men's death, their story took a further twist. "25 years after Heisenberg's death, his last wish, to know what his friend had thought of his actions during the war, became a strange reality. Hiding in a book belonging to Niels Bohr, his family discovered an unsent letter to Heisenberg. The book was the one by Robert Jungk, which painted Heisenberg as a hero. The letter, folded into its pages, laid out what Heisenberg had longed to know.
I have long been meaning to write. I have written at such length to make the case as clear as I can for you, and hope that we can talk in greater detail about this when the opportunity arises."
In fact, a series of draft letters to Heisenberg were written over a period of 5 years. A quarter of a century after Heisenberg's death, the letters explained Bohr's side of the story for the first time. But on the instructions of Niels Bohr's family, no one has been allowed to see them until this year. They show that Bohr was in fact furious at the version of events Heisenberg gave to Robert Jungk.
I think that I owe it to you to tell you that I am greatly amazed to see how much your memory has deceived you in your letter to the author of the book.
It is uncharacteristically angry, I would almost say. I have never seen anything like that. So I think that that letter represents some kind of a gut reaction from Bohr's side to that book.
You informed me that it was your conviction that the war, if it lasted sufficiently long, would be decided with atomic weapons. And I did not sense even the slightest hint that you and your friends were making efforts in a different direction.
It's clear that Niels Bohr was angry. He seems to have thought that Heisenberg tried, whether or not consciously, to tilt what happened in Copenhagen in September 1941 to his side.
In the unsent letters, Bohr says he remembered every word of their Copenhagen meeting. He said the only plausible interpretation of Heisenberg at the time was that Germany was participating vigorously in a race to be first with a nuclear bomb.
You spoke in a manner that could only give me the firm impression that under your leadership, everything was being done in Germany to develop atomic weapons.
But there was more. Niels Bohr had come to suspect that Heisenberg must have had official permission to come to Copenhagen to raise the question of the atomic bomb.
I have, however, wondered from which official police agency permission was given to talk to me about a question which was surrounded by such great dangers.
Bohr felt that Heisenberg was coming on some kind of an official mission, which perhaps was to find out what Bohr knew about the Allied project or something like that.
The letters show how much Bohr's view of the meeting differed from Heisenberg's. Niels Bohr thought at first that Heisenberg was visiting him in Copenhagen to make sure he, as a Jewish scientist, was safe from the occupying Nazis. Then, when he mentioned the atomic bomb to him, he was shocked. Shocked that Germany was in a race to build it. Shocked that his friend was helping Hitler. Then he became convinced that Heisenberg had come to see him about the bomb on an official mission. When he saw Heisenberg's alternative account, he was furious.
From these letters, what you learn is that Bohr didn't want to avoid it, and it's really a great pity that Bohr didn't send these letters, because it would have saved much of their friendship, which apparently got a little lost.
Bohr remained a perfectionist. He spent 5 years drafting and redrafting his letters to Heisenberg. Heisenberg never knew, but his family feels certain he'd have wanted to hear the truth.
I think he would have welcomed to see Bohr's account in writing so that he could have responded to it. I think what was the most difficult part was that they were not talking about that to resolve the problems, and therefore he could not continue to build the relationship. The understanding comes from talking about things. And since he did not get the letter, he had no way of talking about it.
Niels Bohr spent the last 5 years of his life trying to find a way of expressing his feelings about what had happened at the meeting. It seems Bohr felt that sending the letters and expressing his true feelings might have destroyed the most important friendship of his life.
The letters are very moving in that element that you see Niels Bohr sitting there in his very advanced age, I think, trying to make sense of this event and trying to address Heisenberg to help clarify it. An event that was important in his life and important perhaps in the life of the world, and trying to make it fit together with what he had experienced. That makes the letters powerfully moving, I believe.
Niels Bohr summed up the tragic story of their Copenhagen meeting in a single sentence in the unsent letters.
A great matter for mankind was at issue, in which, despite our personal friendship, we had to be regarded as representatives of two sides engaged in mortal combat.
Niels Bohr was right. The lives of both men had been inextricably bound to a great matter for mankind. Unlocking the mysteries of the atom gave birth to their friendship. The moral burden of the atom's devastating power tore them apart.